I don't care what that paper says. People like you don't walk into a hotel like this and expect a suite." Colin Mercer slapped Yolanda Osei's printed reservation flat on the marble desk and slid it back across to her like it was contaminated. His short-sleeved uniform shirt pulled tight across his shoulders when he leaned in. He was close enough that the afternoon light from the lobby windows caught the red climbing up his neck. The line behind her went quiet. A woman in a yellow sundress reached for her husband's arm. A kid near the fountain stopped throwing coins. The security guard by the revolving door was already on his way, unhooking the radio from his belt as he came. Yolanda looked at the reservation, then at Colin. Then, without rushing, she took her phone out of her pocket and set it face up on the counter. She didn't unlock it, she just waited. She looked like she already knew what was coming. "Welcome to Frost Folktales. We tell the stories of people who were underestimated, dismissed, written off, and who decided to speak up anyway. If these stories move you, subscribe so they don't get buried." 14 hours. That's how long Yolanda Osei had been in the air before her shoes hit American pavement again. 14 hours from Accra, across the Atlantic, through time zones that took her night and gave her back a blinding afternoon she hadn't asked for. She hadn't slept on the plane. She almost never did. She worked instead, going through contracts, marking up a property acquisition brief, and trading 17 emails with Benedict Hale about a licensing matter that had nothing to do with this trip. By the time the wheels touched down, she had that tiredness that lives behind your eyes instead of in your muscles. The deep kind, the kind that doesn't show on the outside. She moved through the terminal slowly, on purpose, with the kind of quiet that people in a hurry tend to read as hesitation. She was 43. She'd built 2 businesses from nothing before most of her competitors had finished their second cup of coffee, and you could see it in the way she held her shoulders. The orange blazer was still crisp from the flight, buttoned once at the waist over a white silk shell, trousers to the ankle, one carry-on, because a long time ago she'd worked out that a woman who packs light isn't standing at a baggage carousel when she has somewhere to be. You could see the Meridian Grand from half a block away. That was the point. The flagship took up a full corner of the most expensive boulevard in the city, and the glass threw the afternoon sun back in white and gold. Polished brass revolving door, doorman in white gloves. Inside, the lobby opened up like a cathedral. 40-foot ceilings, a chandelier that dropped 16 feet of cut crystal, tall windows down the south wall pouring in clean afternoon light, cream marble floors with gold running through them, fresh flowers on pedestals at either end of the check-in desk, white lilies and something tropical and purple Yolanda had never bothered to learn the name of, sandalwood and lemon in the air, the low hum you only hear in a place that's built to keep reminding you that you've arrived. Yolanda Osei had co-signed the deed on this building 26 months ago. She crossed the lobby toward the check-in desk, taking it in. The desk ran the length of the east wall, 5 stations with 4 of them staffed. At the closest one, a young woman in a burgundy blazer was finishing up a check-in for a couple with matching luggage. At the far end, a man in his mid-50s stood behind the desk watching the room the way some managers do, like surveillance was a strategy. He had the look of a man who decided very early in life that rooms belonged to him. That was Colin Mercer, property manager, 4 years in. Broad, pale-faced, short-sleeved Meridian burgundy shirt, pressed sharp, silver name badge above the pocket. He wore his authority loud, like a watch he wanted you to notice. He had a smile he only used when he'd already decided what he was going to say next. And as Yolanda crossed the floor with her carry-on, that smile turned on. He didn't wait for her to reach the desk. He came around from behind it. He planted himself in her path about 12 feet from the counter, arms loosely folded, his head tilted in the way that means the next thing out of his mouth isn't really a question. "Can I help you find something?" He said it loudly, on purpose. The couple at the first station turned around. The woman in the yellow sundress, 3 back in the queue with her husband, heard every word and shifted her weight onto her other foot. Even the kid on the edge of the fountain in the middle of the lobby looked up from the coin he'd been turning over in his fingers. Yolanda stopped. She looked at Colin Mercer the way you look at weather you're about to walk through. "I have a reservation," she said. Her voice was even. She reached into the inner pocket of her orange blazer, took out the printed confirmation, folded once, and held it out. He took it between 2 fingers, looked at the page, looked at her. Whatever crossed his face wasn't surprise. He'd decided before she finished the sentence. "This reservation." He said it flat, stepping back to the desk and spreading the paper on the marble. "Who made this for you?" The lobby had thinned around the sound of him. The hum was still there, but the chatter had dropped a layer. People weren't watching yet. They were getting ready to. "I made it," Yolanda said. "My name is on the confirmation." He glanced at the paper, not really reading. "These suites are reserved through a different process. There would have been a verification step." He looked up. "Did someone assist you with this booking?" There it was, dressed up in procedure. "Did someone help you with this?" Meaning a woman like her couldn't have done this alone. Her jaw tightened a fraction. She set down the handle of her carry-on and reached into the blazer's outer pocket. Out came a government photo ID and a Meridian Grand Premier loyalty card. The black one, the tier you had to be invited to apply for. She set both on the marble. "My identification and my loyalty card." He looked at both. He picked up the loyalty card between 2 fingers, turned it over once, put it back. Then he slid both cards across the marble toward her, the same trajectory as the reservation, as if the objects themselves were being refused. "I'm not able to verify this reservation through our current system." His voice had gone louder, pitched for the room now. "I'm going to have to ask you to step aside while we look into this. If the booking is legitimate, we'll get it sorted." A pause. "If not, I'll need you to vacate the property." The woman in the yellow sundress had stopped pretending to look at her phone. Her husband had a hand on her elbow. The couple with matching luggage had gone still at their station. Sunita Rao, in the burgundy blazer at the nearest desk, had stopped typing, hands flat on the keyboard. Mercer unclipped the radio from his belt. He thumbed the transmit button. "Lavelle, front desk. I need an escort to the exit." The casualness was its own kind of cruelty. A beat of silence. Then, "Copy. On my way." Yolanda didn't move, didn't raise her voice, didn't reach for the cards he had pushed back at her. She stood in the wash of afternoon light, coming through the tall windows, her orange blazer bright against the cream marble, her carry-on at her side, and she watched him. She'd done the math already. The rest was just timing. Across the lobby, a large man in a security uniform was moving toward the desk. Footsteps measured, his face arranged the way men arrange their faces when they think they're being professional. Then Yolanda reached for the counter. She picked up her phone, the one she'd placed there face up and unlocked, and turned it so the screen faced the lobby. An incoming call was lighting it up. The name on it was large, white, and one nobody in the room was going to mistake. The phone lit up. Reginald Stowe. White letters on black, pulsing with the ring, and the lobby of the Meridian Grand went quiet in that way crowded rooms do when something is about to happen and nobody can say what. Sun was still coming through the tall windows. Yolanda Osei looked at the phone for maybe a second. She had always known this moment would come. She picked it up, pressed speaker, set it back on the counter face up, and turned the volume all the way up with her thumb. "Yolanda." Reginald's voice carried across the marble. He sounded like an old friend, the kind of warmth that takes years to earn and can't be faked. "Sorry about the timing. How was Accra?" She didn't shift her weight. Orange blazer, dark trousers, 14 hours in the air and none of it showed. Long, productive. "Reggie, stay on the line a second." A pause. What's going on? I'm at the flagship. The duty manager refused my reservation, told me it was probably fraudulent, and called security to walk me out. She delivered it flat, the way a surgeon describes an incision. The facts could carry themselves. Figured you'd want to hear it from me. 3 seconds, maybe. It felt like more. Colin Mercer opened his mouth and shut it. Whatever expression he'd been wearing all morning was coming apart in slow pieces. When Reginald spoke again, the warmth was gone. Not replaced by anger, something colder and more controlled than that. Something deliberate and absolute. I know the property. I know the manager. Another pause, landing like a stone. Yolanda, introduce yourself to the lobby, please. Colin laughed, or tried to. Look, I don't know what kind of… Mr. Mercer. Colin stopped. Nobody on that phone had been given his name. Yolanda looked at him for a moment, then at the room. It was full. 20-something people. The bar, the concierge desk, a family with luggage, a man reading by the window, a woman at a high table with a laptop whose eyes had been tracking every detail since the confrontation began. They were all watching. You could feel it. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. My name is Yolanda Osei. I'm the majority owner of the Meridian Grand. I hold 51% equity in this property and every property under this brand. My name is on the deed of this building. I co-founded the chain 2 years ago with Reginald Stowe. That's him on the phone. She paused there, longer than was comfortable. This hotel is here, looks like this, is called what it's called, because I chose it. Nobody moved. Behind the desk, Sunita Rao had both hands flat on the counter, the way you do when you need something solid to be touching. She was staring at Yolanda. You could almost watch her going back through the last 20 minutes in her head, recalibrating everything she thought she knew. Antoine, from security, was 3 feet off, one hand still half up from whatever he'd been about to do. He let it fall slowly. He stayed where he was, across the lobby, near the bar, where afternoon light caught the glass surfaces and scattered into small bright fragments. Montgomery Peel set down his drink. He was a broad man in his 50s, with silver at his temples and the settled, comfortable look of someone who had never once walked into a room and wondered whether he belonged there. He had been watching since Colin Mercer's first loud performance at the desk. He had been smirking at it, the way people smirk when they witness something they find essentially entertaining and essentially unsurprising. The smirk was gone now. He looked, instead, like a man reviewing a decision he had not known he was making at the time he made it. Reginald Stowe's voice came through the phone again. Mr. Mercer, you will personally escort Miss Osei to the owner's suite. You will ensure she has everything she requires, and you will make yourself available. I want to be clear about that word, available, for the remainder of the day. Another pause, shorter this time, with more weight in it. I will be in contact with the property shortly. Do you understand what I've said to you? Colin Mercer's mouth moved. He had gone pale in the way that people go pale when the blood actually retreats from the surface of the skin, when the body is informed by the brain that something has gone catastrophically, irreversibly wrong. His earlier confidence, that loud, performative certainty he had deployed like a weapon in front of a packed lobby, had not simply left him. It had turned around and was pointing back at him. Every word he had said in that lobby in the past 20 minutes was still in the air. The lobby had heard it. The lobby was still hearing it. And the lobby now knew exactly who Yolanda Osei was. Yes, he said. Yes, I understand. Good. Reginald Stowe's voice carried no satisfaction in it, which was somehow worse than if it had. Yolanda, I'll call you in an hour. Thank you, Reggie. The call ended. The lobby remained perfectly still for a moment that stretched past its natural length. One of those suspended instants when a room full of strangers shares the same private understanding and no one wants to be the first to break the spell. Yolanda Osei reached down and picked up her phone from the marble counter. She slid it into the pocket of her dark trousers with a single smooth motion. She picked up the handle of her carry-on. She straightened once. Not a performance, simply the adjustment of a person who carries herself with an exactness that costs her nothing because it has always been natural. And then she looked at Colin Mercer. It was not an angry look. That was the thing about it that the lobby would remember in the hours and days that followed, when they replayed this moment the way people replay moments that feel like turning points even as they are happening. It was not anger. Anger would have given Colin Mercer something to respond to, something to push against, a frame in which he could have positioned himself as misunderstood or provoked, or the victim of someone else's emotion. This was not that. This was something quieter, something that had been present in her eyes since the beginning, held in reserve, waiting for the precisely correct moment to be seen. It was recognition, the simple, devastating act of seeing someone clearly, not what they pretended to be, not the authority they performed, but exactly what they were, and letting them know they had been seen. She said 2 words, "After you," in the service corridor that ran alongside the east wall of the lobby, half hidden by the door that staff used to move between the front of house and the interior of the hotel. Odette Carmichael stood with her housekeeping cart beside her. She was a woman in her late 50s with the careful stillness of someone who has spent years making herself invisible in rooms where visibility carried a cost. She had watched the entire scene from this doorway. She had watched Colin Mercer intercept a woman at the front desk and perform his routine. She knew the routine. She had seen it before. She had seen versions of it more times than she could count over 2 years in this building. She had watched and stayed still, as she had always stayed still, because she had learned what happened to people in her position when they did not. But she had also watched something else. She had watched the phone light up. She had watched Yolanda Osei answer it without flinching. She had watched the lobby recalibrate in real time, like a compass needle swinging to find true north. And she had watched Yolanda Osei look at Colin Mercer with those 2 quiet words and all the weight that lived behind them. Odette Carmichael pressed her lips together. She exhaled slowly through her nose, and then, in the doorway of the service corridor where no one could see her, she allowed herself something she had not allowed herself in a very long time. It started as a tightening at the corner of her mouth. It moved into her eyes. It was not laughter, not exactly. It was fiercer than laughter and more private than any celebration. It was the expression of a woman who had been keeping a notebook for 2 years, carefully, patiently, in careful handwriting, documenting every date and every name and every incident, keeping it for a day she had believed in but had never been certain would come. Across the lobby, near the window table with the open laptop, Celeste Fontaine had not looked up from her screen since Yolanda Osei had said the words 51% owner. She was typing with the focused, rapid intensity of a journalist who knows she is sitting inside the story. Her fingers did not pause. Her eyes did not wander. Colin Mercer straightened his short-sleeved uniform shirt. His face had settled into something rigid and unreadable, the expression of a man who has not yet accepted what has happened, but has run out of alternatives. He turned toward the elevator. He began to walk, and Yolanda Osei, majority owner of the Meridian Grand, co-signatory on the deed, the reason this specific building existed in this specific location, rolled her single carry-on across the marble floor and followed him, unhurried, sovereign, and absolutely certain about what came next. The owner's suite on the 14th floor of the Meridian Grand was extraordinary, and Yolanda barely looked at it. Windows ran the full length of the eastern wall. Afternoon sun lay across the marble in long panels. Beyond the glass, the city did what cities do. She set her carry-on beside the wardrobe and walked to the window. She still had her orange blazer on. She hadn't taken it off since Accra, hadn't slept more than 3 hours on the plane, and had just spent 40 minutes in a marble lobby while a man in a short-sleeved uniform shirt told a room full of strangers at volume that she didn't belong there. She pressed 2 fingers to the bridge of her nose and exhaled. Her phone buzzed. 3 words from a number she knew by heart. On my way. Darnell got there 53 minutes later, still in his conference clothes. Green top, blue jacket, dark trousers, lanyard he'd forgotten about. 26, 7 years younger than her, their mother's eyes. He hugged her the second the door shut and didn't let go for a while. You okay? I'm functional. With her, that meant okay. He dropped the lanyard on the dining table and looked around. Then he looked back at her with the face he'd been wearing since the call. Not fury, close to it. Tell me everything. She did. No drama. Mercer at the desk. The printed reservation pushed back across the counter. Questions about who'd booked the room. ID waved off. Loyalty card waved off. The radio call to security. She told it in order, the way she told everything, and Darnell didn't interrupt. When she got to the part where her phone lit up with Reginald Stowe's name, his jaw moved. That's when the lobby found out, she said, and Mercer stood there and watched his morning come apart in front of 40 people. She paused. He didn't say anything. I don't think he could. Darnell was quiet. Outside, the city did its glitter thing. Then, so what are we doing? She sat down at the dining table. He took the chair across from her, forearms on the wood. This isn't the first time, she said. He went very still. I've been getting reports about this property for about 8 months. Quiet ones. Second-hand mostly. One formal complaint that went through the general inquiry channel and then just stopped moving. Guests of color, things at the desk. It's a pattern. She folded her hands on the table, the way she did when she wanted to be exact. I wanted to come myself. No announcement, no heads up to anyone here. I wasn't going to give them a chance to behave because the co-owner was in the building. I needed to know what this hotel actually is when it thinks nobody important is watching. You tested it. I tested it. And I was hoping I'd walk in, get checked in, come up here and have nothing to report. She looked at him. I was hoping to fail that test, Darnell. He didn't answer right away. Law school had taught him what one incident looks like and what 8 months of incidents look like, and he was working out which one was sitting across from him. When he finally looked up, the fury had cooled into something he could use. Then we're not managing an apology. No, we are not. 14 floors down, Colin Mercer had the office door locked and the phone pressed hard against his ear, and the call wasn't going the way he needed it to go. Harris was his regional supervisor, 2 states away. Corporate. He'd picked up on the 3rd ring and had said almost nothing since. Colin had used the word miscommunication 3 times already. He'd floated a database error. He'd called the lobby thing a brief procedural confusion that had been resolved cooperatively by all parties. He was being careful about every word, very careful. Harris said, I'm going to need to understand this better, Colin. You're telling me the co-owner of the property tried to check in and you had her escorted out. There was no way to verify. She is on the deed of this building. Colin's free hand found the edge of his desk and gripped it. The reservation was flagged in a way that, stop! Harris's voice had gone flat. I need to think. Don't talk to any staff about it. Don't make any statements. Sit tight. The call ended. Colin set his phone face down and stood in his locked office. The fluorescence buzzed. The story in his head and the story being told about him were not the same story. He could feel them coming apart. He unlocked the door, straightened his shirt, and walked out to the front desk. Sunita was there, going through a reservation file that didn't need it. Her hands needed something to do. She looked up when he came over. Her face gave him nothing. I need you to document that the system flagged the Osei booking, he said low. Automated error. It happens with international itineraries. That's what caused the confusion this morning. She looked at him for a long 3 seconds. That's not what happened. Sunita, the reservation was clean. I'm looking at the record right now. It was clean when she got here. It was clean before that. There was no flag. She held his eyes. I'm not going to say there was. His face didn't change. Something behind it did. He straightened up and walked off without saying anything else. Antoine had been in hotel security 11 years, 4 at this property. He didn't second-guess himself often. The job didn't reward it, but he'd been running the morning back in his head since the lobby went quiet after that phone call, and he kept landing on the same picture. Himself, crossing the marble floor toward Yolanda Osei, his hand already reaching for her elbow. And what that picture looked like next to who she actually was. He found Odette in the corridor by housekeeping, restocking a service cart. Late 50s, silver hair cut short. She moved the way you move when you've stopped having to think about your own work. She'd been at this hotel longer than anyone else on the payroll. He stopped beside the cart. Odette, voice down. This morning, in the lobby. He paused. Have you seen that before? Here? She didn't answer right away. She finished folding the towel, set it on the cart, and turned to look at him. She wasn't surprised. She wasn't guarded. She looked like she'd been waiting for somebody to ask. Come with me. She took him to the staff locker room, empty at this hour. She spun the combination, opened the locker, and reached past something on the top shelf. What she came out with was a notebook. The cover was bent at one corner. The spine had been taped, and the tape had gone yellow. She held it for a beat before she handed it over. He opened it. Careful handwriting. Every entry dated. Every name spelled out. Every incident written down in plain language a lawyer couldn't argue with. He turned a page. Another. The entries went back 2 years. He looked up. She didn't say anything. He closed the notebook. 2 years. He stood there in the locker room holding it, and the morning he thought he'd had got smaller and smaller in his hands. The owner's suite sat at the top floor of the Meridian Grand, and at 4:30 in the afternoon, the natural skylight above the sitting area poured clean, unbroken light across the room. Every surface gleamed. The overhead lighting in the suite's corridor was crisp and steady, the kind of brightness that hides nothing. Yolanda Osei had changed out of her orange blazer and into a fresh one, same color, different jacket, and sat in the center chair of the suite's sitting area with her dark trousers pressed and her posture composed. Darnell stood near the window with his arms folded, his green top catching the afternoon light, a blue jacket draped over the chair behind him. He had not said much since Yolanda finished telling him about Odette Carmichael and the notebook. He did not need to. His jaw was doing all the talking. There was a soft knock at the door. Yolanda did not rise immediately. She took one measured breath, set down her water glass, and then crossed the room and opened the door herself. Odette Carmichael stood in the hallway in her housekeeper's uniform, dark trousers, a pressed white-collared top beneath the hotel's slate-gray service vest. She was 61 years old, broad-shouldered, with close-cropped gray hair and the kind of face that had made peace with patience a long time ago. Her hands were folded in front of her and held between them, pressed flat against her palms like something sacred or something fragile, was the notebook. It was a standard composition notebook, the black and white marbled kind, its cover softened by years of handling, and its corners bent with the specific wear of something repeatedly hidden and retrieved. A rubber band held it shut. Yolanda stepped back from the door and said quietly, "Please come in." Odette entered. She looked at Darnell. He gave her a single respectful nod. She looked back at Yolanda and stood very still for a moment, as though confirming something she had wondered about for a long time. Then she sat in the chair across from Yolanda's, placed the notebook on the low table between them, and kept her hands resting on top of it. "Take all the time you need," Yolanda said. Odette looked down at the notebook. She pulled off the rubber band carefully, folded it once, and set it aside. She opened the cover. Her handwriting on the first page was small and deliberate, each entry dated in the upper left corner in blue pen. "I started keeping this 22 months ago," Odette said. Her voice was steady. It had the quality of something that had rehearsed itself in private for a long time and was now finally ready to be spoken aloud in a room where it might matter. March. A family came in. Mother, father, 2 little girls. Both parents in business casual. He had a briefcase. They had a confirmed reservation for a suite on the 8th floor. Mr. Mercer was at the desk. I was collecting linens from the trolley near the east corridor. I could hear everything. She turned to the first entry and read the date. Then she looked up. He told them the reservation had been canceled, that the system had flagged it. He offered them a standard room on the 2nd floor instead. When the father asked to see the cancellation notice, Mr. Mercer said the system didn't generate one. He said it with a smile. Odette paused. The suite on the 8th floor sat empty for 2 nights. I cleaned it myself. Yolanda said nothing. Her hands were still in her lap. Odette turned the page. She read for 37 minutes. She did not rush and she did not editorialize. She read dates, descriptions, names where she had them, room numbers where she remembered them. She read about luggage marked for delivery to rooms that never received it, later found staged in the service area. She read about security being radioed to the lobby on 4 separate occasions for black guests who were doing nothing more than waiting. One of them was waiting for a car. One was waiting for a colleague. One was reading a newspaper. She read about a jazz musician who had stayed at the hotel for a conference and been told twice that the executive lounge was closed on a Sunday afternoon when Odette herself had just finished restocking it and watched 3 other guests walk in unchallenged within the same hour. She read about upgraded rooms withheld from guests of color and quietly reassigned. She read about a woman traveling alone, a professor from a university in Montreal, who had been asked by Colin Mercer in the lobby whether she was a registered guest, in a tone Odette described as the one he reserved for people he had already decided did not belong. Darnell had stopped standing still approximately 12 minutes into the reading. He was moving now in a slow, controlled circuit near the window, not pacing so much as containing something. His hands had moved from folded to pressed flat against the windowsill. He was staring at the city below with his back to the room, and Yolanda could see the muscles in his jaw working steadily. He was a 3rd-year law student. He knew exactly what he was listening to. He understood the legal architecture of what was accumulating on that low table entry by entry, and his fury was the specific, disciplined fury of someone who knows that losing composure right now would help no one. Yolanda did not move throughout the reading. She listened the way she had trained herself to listen in boardrooms and in courtrooms and in the offices of people who had underestimated her, absolutely and without interruption, letting every word land where it needed to land before processing it. But there were 2 moments that cost her. The first was the entry about the little girls in the lobby, the ones who had come in holding their father's hand and had watched Colin Mercer smile while he took their suite away. The second was the entry near the end, dated 11 weeks ago, about an elderly black couple celebrating their wedding anniversary. Odette had written in careful blue ink, because she had seen the card on the luggage, who had been made to wait 40 minutes at check-in while Colin Mercer processed 3 subsequent guests ahead of them without explanation. The husband had a cane. They had stood the entire time. Yolanda didn't look away. Her face held. She swallowed once, and it was the only thing in the room that moved. Odette closed the notebook on the last entry and folded her hands on top of it. She waited. Yolanda let the quiet sit for a beat. "Why did you keep this?" Something behind Odette's eyes settled. She'd been ready for the question. "Because I knew someone would eventually walk in here who could actually do something. I've been at this hotel 11 years. My first year I reported twice through the internal channel. Nothing came of it. So I started writing it down instead. Paper doesn't get lost the way complaints do. She looked down at the notebook, then up again. And I had to believe the building belonged to somebody, that sooner or later somebody would come through the door. Darnell turned from the window. Ms. Carmichael, what you have here is a consistent pattern of racially discriminatory practice across 22 months. Dates, room numbers, witnesses. This isn't a complaint, it's a record. He let that land. That changes what comes next. I know, Odette said. Yolanda walked to the writing desk and picked up her phone. She didn't look over when she dialed. Benedict, it's me. I need you at the Meridian Grand. I have documented evidence of systematic discriminatory practice at this property going back almost 2 years. A contemporaneous written log, multiple incidents. She listened. In person. Today if you can. A pause. Thank you. She set the phone down. Benedict Hale, corporate counsel for the Meridian Grand, booked a flight inside of 20 minutes. Yolanda turned back to Odette. Her composure was still there, but her face had changed. Something in it had loosened. That notebook doesn't leave this suite. It's evidence now. You have my word. Odette nodded. She didn't cry, and she didn't look relieved either. She looked like somebody who had been allowed, finally, to put something down. The phone on the desk buzzed. A text, not a call. Yolanda read it twice. It was from Sunita Rao. I heard Odette came to you. I want to add my account. I have my own record. Please let me come forward. Yolanda set the phone down and looked at Darnell. He straightened a little. Neither of them said anything. They didn't need to. 2 floors below, Colin Mercer was on his 4th call of the afternoon, trying to get hold of his regional supervisor, who had stopped picking up around noon. His credentials were still active. His access hadn't been pulled. He had no idea any of this was happening above him, that Sunita Rao was already typing, that the notebook had been read end to end, that the people in the suite upstairs were no longer deciding whether, only how. Whatever was coming for him was already on its way. The boardroom on the 14th floor of the Meridian Grand had never been used for anything like this. Benedict Hale got there at 9:30, wheeling a hard-sided briefcase, charcoal jacket over a green shirt, and dark trousers. He crossed the lobby the way a man crosses a lobby when he already knows what the problem is and is just walking toward it. 40 years of rooms like the one upstairs were in the way he carried himself. The boardroom was built to impress. A mahogany table that could seat 20. Fluorescents washing the whole place in flat, cool light. Floor-to-ceiling windows along the east wall, full of morning sun. You couldn't really hide anywhere in it. And Benedict liked that. He set the briefcase at the head of the table and started laying things out. By 10, he had 3 binders in a row, a laptop open, and 2 yellow legal pads squared off next to the binders. One of the pads already had a page of his handwriting on it. A small recorder, the kind used in formal proceedings, sat near the middle of the table. He hadn't called anyone yet. He wasn't ready. He wanted the room to be the room first. Yolanda Osei came in at 10:15. She'd swapped her orange blazer for a clean one in the same cut. Fresh white shirt, dark trousers that had been pressed since she'd put them on. 4 hours in the owner's suite, and somehow she looked like she'd slept the whole night. She had her phone and a thin leather portfolio, and nothing else. She shook Benedict's hand, took the chair to his left, opened the portfolio to a page she clearly already knew, read it again anyway, then closed her hands over it and waited. Darnell came in 2 minutes after her. His law school conference lanyard was still looped through the strap of his bag, which he dropped on a chair. Green hoodie, dark jeans. The lanyard and the clothes made him look like a kid until you got to his eyes, which were doing something a lot more careful than the rest of him. He pulled a legal pad toward himself, uncapped a pen, didn't say anything. The 3 of them sat in the bright boardroom and waited. At 10:47, Colin Mercer knocked. His assistant had told him corporate legal wanted a brief check-in about the morning's incident. Procedural, documenting the sequence of events for a routine internal report. Come alone. Nobody had said anything about bringing a lawyer because the message had been written carefully so that nobody would. 14th floor, 10:45. He was 2 minutes late. He stepped in wearing the full manager's uniform. Short-sleeved white shirt with the Meridian crest over the pocket, dark trousers, and the first thing that hit him was the light. The next thing was Yolanda Osei sitting at the table. He stopped walking. She didn't look up right away. She was reading. When she finished the page, she turned it, finished that one too, and then she looked at him. Her face wasn't anything. She was just paying attention, the way you pay attention to a meeting you intend to be done with by noon. His eyes went to Darnell, whom he didn't know, and then to Benedict, whom he half remembered from a corporate email 18 months ago. Something in his shoulders dropped about 1/4 of an inch. Benedict gestured at the chair across from him. "Mr. Mercer, thank you for coming. Please sit." Colin sat. He pulled the chair in, put his hands flat on the table, and got his face under control. "I appreciate the meeting. I do want to say up front that this morning involved a miscommunication around a reservation entry, and I think once we walk through the sequence, we'll get to this morning," Benedict said. He sounded almost friendly. He hadn't touched the binders. He laced his fingers on the table. "I want to start somewhere else. Take a look at this." He slid a single photocopied page across the mahogany. Colin leaned in. It was a page from Odette Carmichael's notebook. A copy. The original was somewhere else, locked up, dated 14 months ago. In neat, steady handwriting, it laid out a specific evening on which a black couple with a confirmed suite reservation had been told at check-in that their room was unavailable due to a maintenance issue. The guests were named, so was the manager on duty. The manager on duty was Colin Mercer. He read the page. Then he read it again. Something happened in his face that he wasn't fast enough to catch. Where did this come from? From an employee of this hotel who has been documenting incidents for approximately 24 months, Benedict Hale said. The documentation is thorough. The handwriting is consistent. The dates correspond to shift records we have already pulled. I have the originals here. He opened the first binder. He did not slide it toward Colin Mercer. He simply opened it so that it was visible. Page after page of the same careful handwriting, the same methodical dates, incident after incident arranged in sequence like a ledger. Colin Mercer's jaw tightened. Who is this employee? Because I can tell you right now, if it's who I think it is, there is a personal grievance involved. This is not the employee's identity is formally protected under the scope of this audit, Benedict Hale said. Their account has been corroborated by a second staff member's written statement. He slid a second sheet across the table. It was Sunita Rao's statement. 2 pages, signed and dated that morning, describing the events at the front desk in precise and damaging detail. Colin Mercer looked at it and then pushed it back. Sunita is a junior associate who was flustered by an unusual situation. She's impressionable. She doesn't fully understand what she saw. Darnell Osei wrote something on his legal pad. He did not look up. "Mr. Mercer," Benedict Hale said, and his voice remained pleasant throughout, which was somehow worse than if it had been cold. The statement contained specific language that Ms. Rao documented contemporaneously on her shift log. She flagged the incident in the hotel's internal system within 40 minutes of it occurring. The timestamp is on record. I have it here. He turned a page in the second binder. Colin Mercer looked at Yolanda Osei. She had not spoken. She had her portfolio open, and she was making a small notation, unhurried, as though this were a routine quarterly review. She did not look up when his eyes found her. She finished her notation, turned a page, and continued reading. He looked back at Benedict Hale. "I want to be clear that this morning I was acting in the interest of the hotel's security protocols. when a reservation cannot be immediately verified. The reservation was in the system, Benedict Hale said. It was visible on the check-in screen that Ms. Rao was operating. I have a screenshot of the system display taken from the hotel's own administrative log at the precise time of the incident. The reservation was not only present, it was flagged as a priority guest booking, which is the classification applied to ownership-level guests. He turned another page. Colin Mercer's mouth opened and closed. Darnell Osei wrote something else on his legal pad. Benedict Hale continued. He did not raise his voice. He did not accelerate. He moved through each of Colin Mercer's prior deflections, the way water moves through a space, finding every available gap, filling it, moving forward. He addressed the maintenance issue incident from 14 months ago, with the actual maintenance log from that night, which showed no reported maintenance issue on any suite. He addressed a second incident from the notebook, a black family's luggage allegedly misrouted, their upgraded room given to another guest, with a duplicate keycard issuance record that placed the upgraded room in use 17 minutes after check-in began, while the family was still standing at the desk. He addressed a third incident, then a fourth. Colin Mercer stopped offering explanations after the fourth. He sat with his hands flat on the table and his expression held together by something that was rapidly running out. Yolanda Osei still had not spoken. She did not need to. Her presence at the head of that bright, unforgiving room said everything the table needed said. She was not there to argue. She was not there to perform anger. She was there because she owned this building and everything in it, and because the woman who had kept that notebook for 2 years had handed it to her, and because she had decided on the hour she received it that what came next would be exact and permanent and correct. At 12 minutes past noon, Benedict Hale closed the third binder and looked across the table.
Mr. Mercer, effective immediately, your access credentials to all Meridian Grand hotel systems have been suspended pending the conclusion of this audit. You will be contacted by this office within 72 hours regarding next steps. You are not to contact any current hotel staff members directly in the interim.
Colin Mercer looked at Yolanda Osei one final time. She met his gaze. Her expression was still not angry. It was still not triumphant. It was the face of a woman who had already decided and was simply watching the decision take effect. She said nothing. The door to the boardroom opened. Antoine Lavelle stood in the frame in his security uniform, hands at his sides, posture straight. There was no hesitation in him. There was no ambivalence. Whatever he had wrestled with the morning before, when he had walked toward Yolanda Osei across that marble lobby with someone else's instructions in his ear, he had settled it. He looked at Colin Mercer with a steady, professional neutrality. "Mr. Mercer," Antoine Lavelle said, "I'll walk you out." Colin Mercer stood. He did not speak. He walked ahead of Antoine Lavelle through the boardroom door and into the bright corridor beyond it, and the door closed behind them with a sound that was very quiet and very final. In the boardroom, Benedict Hale began preparing the audit file for formal submission. Darnell Osei reviewed his notes. Yolanda Osei looked out at the morning skylight filling the east windows. The city spread wide and bright below the glass, and she thought about a battered notebook and the woman who had kept it, and she let herself breathe. The article went live at 4:47 p.m. Celeste had spent 3 hours at the desk under the skylight, and she'd written it the way she wrote anything that mattered, without reaching, because the facts didn't need help. She titled it "What I Watched Happen at the Meridian Grand." No subheading, just her name, the publication banner, and a first line. "I was standing close enough to see the reservation slide back across the marble counter like it was something unclean, and I knew I was watching a woman be treated as though she didn't belong in a building she owns." She pressed publish, set her phone face up on the desk, and watched the counter. It moved slowly at first. A handful of shares, a few comments. Someone in London tagged it into a hospitality forum. Then a travel journalist in Chicago picked it up and added 3 words, "Read this immediately." And after that, the counter stopped behaving like a counter. By 6, 14,000 shares. By 8, over 40. The Meridian Grand was trending on 2 platforms, and Celeste's phone was hot enough that she moved it to the windowsill. She'd been careful. She named no one she couldn't verify. She described what she'd seen from the lobby seats. The orange blazer, the printed reservation pushed back across the marble. Colin Mercer's voice pitched a little louder than it needed to be. The guard crossing the floor, and then the phone screen lighting up with a name that ended the whole thing in about 4 seconds. She described Yolanda the way Yolanda deserved. Precise, composed, quiet without being soft. One line kept getting quoted. She didn't raise her voice once. She didn't have to. Upstairs, in the owner's suite, Yolanda read the article once and set her phone down. Darnell was on the couch across from her in his green shirt and dark jeans, watching her face. "She got it right," Yolanda said. "Exactly right." Her phone rang before they could say anything else. Reginald Stowe on the screen. She picked up. "I've seen it," he said. "My team's been fielding press for 2 hours. That isn't why I'm calling." "I know. Tell me what you need." She'd been thinking about it since Benedict Hale arrived, since Odette opened the notebook, since the boardroom that morning when she'd let the documentation do the talking. So she said it without warming up. "Full authority over the property review. I want to implement whatever the audit recommends. No committee, no regional approval, no delay." A pause. Maybe 2 seconds. "Done," Reginald said. "Anything else?" "Not tonight. I'll have a list for you by morning." The call ended. Darnell looked at her with something close to a smile. That was fast. He's a smart man. Smart people don't argue with the obvious. Downstairs, the hotel kept doing what hotels do. Guests arriving, luggage moving, the front desk taking calls. But the staff break room near the service corridor was quieter than usual at shift change, which is its own kind of noise. Everyone thinking the same thing and waiting to see who would say it. A bellhop named Marcus, 11 months on the job, said it. "You all saw what happened this morning, and you've seen the news now." Nobody disagreed. Over the next 2 hours, 3 more employees walked separately to the front of house office, where Sunita Rao was working the phones in her orange top behind the desk glass. A room service attendant, a junior concierge, a front desk associate who'd been at the hotel 4 years. Each one asked some version of the same thing. "Is there somewhere I can tell what I saw?" Sunita gave each of them Benedict Hale's extension, written down on a torn page from her notepad. Montgomery Peel went back to his room around 2. At 6 he came down to the lobby bar, jacket on the stool next to him, and ordered a drink he wouldn't finish. He'd seen the article. He also knew that the smirk he'd worn that morning, the slight forward lean of a man enjoying something that wasn't his problem, wasn't the sort of thing a reporter could print, but somebody had clocked it anyway. Celeste Fontaine found him at 6:30. She introduced herself, recorder visible in her hand. She didn't pretend to be there for any other reason. "I'd like your account of what happened in the lobby this morning. You were close to the desk, clear sightline." Peel looked at the recorder, then at her, then back at the drink he wasn't drinking. No comment. She nodded and went. In the follow-up the next morning she wrote one line about him. A wealthy guest, standing within feet of the check-in counter, with an unobstructed view of the full interaction, declined to comment. That was the whole mention. She didn't need more. His silence had already said the rest. 40 minutes out, Colin Mercer was sitting in a chair by the window in a room he hadn't bothered to light, watching the story go by the screen of his phone. His name was showing up in the comments, misspelled some places, right enough in others. He'd called his regional supervisor 3 times. Voicemail. Voicemail. The third one just rang and then stopped ringing without ever connecting to anything. He put the phone face down on the arm of the chair. The article wasn't cruel. That was the part that got him. It wasn't sensational. It didn't editorialize. It didn't call him anything. It just told you what happened, in the order it happened. In the marble lobby of a hotel he'd run for 7 years, in front of 50 people, on a Tuesday. It didn't have to make him a monster. The morning did the work. He sat there a while. Back at the Meridian Grand, they'd reset the boardroom again. 2 laptops on the long table, a stack of printouts, a legal pad covered in handwriting, a glass of water at every seat. The fluorescents ran the whole length of the ceiling and didn't leave a shadow anywhere in the room. Benedict Hale was at one end, jacket still on, second legal pad open. Odette Carmichael sat across from him in her uniform, upright, hands folded on the table, the notebook open to page 1. Hale looked up. "Mrs. Carmichael, before we start, this is a formal proceeding. Everything you say gets transcribed and goes into the audit record. Your account is protected under the investigation. You okay with that?" "I am. And, personally, what you did, keeping this for 2 years, at real risk to yourself, is what we should have been doing for you the whole time. We didn't. That'll be in the record, too." She looked at him for a beat. You couldn't read her face exactly. She was calm. Whatever was under the calm had been waiting. "Then let's start." Hale opened the transcription document. The recorder in the middle of the table was already running. Odette Carmichael turned to page 1 and started to read. Dates, names, what happened, written in her own hand from 2 years of mornings and afternoons in corridors where nobody else had bothered to look. 5 floors down, the lobby was full of people who'd never hear her name. Her name was on the top of the document. The owner's suite at the Meridian Grand caught the morning light the way expensive rooms always do. Generously, without apology. The overhead fixtures were crisp and full, and the skylight above the sitting area poured a clean rectangle of pale gold across the mahogany table where Benedict Hale had arranged his papers with the particular precision of a man who understood that neatness was a form of argument. 40 pages, tabbed, indexed, annotated in the margins with citation numbers that corresponded to a separate appendix he had prepared overnight. He set the bound report in front of the empty chair at the head of the table and stepped back from it, the way you step back from something you have built and are quietly proud of. Yolanda Osei entered the room from the adjoining bedroom, dressed in a forest green top and dark trousers, her natural hair pulled back, her expression composed and awake in a way that had nothing to do with sleep and everything to do with the particular discipline of a woman who had been preparing for this moment far longer than the past 5 days. Reginald Stowe was already seated on the far side of the table, his blue jacket pressed, his hands folded on the surface in front of him. He had flown in from London that morning without being asked. That told Yolanda Osei everything she needed to know about where his loyalty sat. She took the chair at the head of the table. She pulled the report toward her and opened to the first page without speaking. Benedict Hale began. He did not sensationalize. That was what made him effective. He walked them through the findings in the same measured tone he might use to describe a property acquisition, steady, precise, unemotional, and the contrast between his delivery and the weight of what he was describing made every sentence land harder. The audit had reviewed 3 years of reservation records, staff incident logs, security call records, guest complaint submissions, internal communications, and the testimonies of 11 current and former employees. Odette Carmichael's notebook had not been the only source of documentation. It had simply been the most meticulous. The pattern was not subtle once you looked directly at it. Guests of color were checked into standard rooms at a rate significantly higher than comparable white guests with the same reservation tier. Security had been called to public areas following the presence of black guests on 43 documented occasions over 30 months. with follow-up incident reports filed on fewer than 6 of those calls, meaning the rest had been without cause. 3 formal complaints submitted through the chain's guest feedback portal had been intercepted at the property level and never forwarded to corporate. One of those complaints, filed 18 months ago by a black business traveler who had been publicly questioned about the validity of his corporate account, bore a notation in the property's internal system, "Resolved at site, no escalation required." The notation had been entered by Colin Mercer. Reginald Stowe had gone very still by the time Benedict Hale reached that page. Yolanda Osei turned to the tabbed section. She read the notation herself. She closed the report and set it flat on the table. She said nothing for a long moment. Then she asked Benedict Hale whether the documentation was sufficient for termination for cause, with no severance exposure. He told her it was more than sufficient. She nodded once and said, "Proceed." Colin Mercer received the formal notification at 11:47 that morning via certified digital transmission and a concurrent call from Benedict Hale, who read the determination aloud as required by the chain's employment protocol. Termination for cause, gross misconduct, discriminatory business practice. The call lasted 4 minutes. Colin Mercer spoke twice, once to say he would be retaining counsel, and once, near the end, to say that this was not what it looked like. Benedict Hale thanked him for his time and ended the call. There was no satisfaction in the room when it was done. That was the thing that surprised Darnell Osei, who had been sitting quietly in the corner chair throughout the morning, his orange top and dark jeans making him look younger than his sharpness warranted. He had expected to feel something sharper when the decision was formalized. Instead, what settled over the room felt more like the particular quiet that follows a storm. Not peace exactly, but the absence of a noise you had been living with so long you had stopped noticing it. Yolanda Osei stood and walked to the window. The city spread below the suite in full morning light, and she looked at it for a moment before turning back. She said, "He was not the whole problem." Everyone in the room understood what she meant. The regional supervisor, a man named Gerald Foss, who had occupied a mid-tier corporate position for 11 years on the strength of not making waves, was formally referred for his own disciplinary review by the end of the afternoon. The buried complaint on his desk 18 months ago was the document that undid him. He had received it. He had acknowledged receipt in a system-generated confirmation email that his own inbox had preserved without his awareness. He had done nothing. In the architecture of what had happened at the Meridian Grand, Gerald Foss was not a villain in the way Colin Mercer was a villain, and that distinction mattered. He was something more familiar, and in some ways more damaging. A man who had seen the shape of a problem clearly enough to recognize it, and had decided that recognizing it was sufficient, that looking away quietly was a neutral act. The audit report called it what it was. The policy announcement was scheduled for 2 o'clock. Yolanda Osei stood at the front of the Meridian Grand's main conference room, under overhead fluorescent light, facing a room that included senior staff, 2 members of Reginald Stowe's communications team, Celeste Fontaine, who had been offered a seat at Yolanda Osei's express invitation, and the property's full front-of-house team. She had written her own remarks. She had not asked anyone to soften them. She told the room that the Meridian Grand had failed, not in a single morning 5 days ago, but across years of quiet, procedural, daily failure that had been made possible by a culture of permission. Permission to look away, permission to accept patterns without questioning them, permission to treat some guests as suspects and others as guests. She said the chain's name had been built on a promise of exceptional hospitality, and that promise had been broken, repeatedly and without accountability, on the watch of people who were paid to uphold it. Then she told them what would change: mandatory anti-discrimination training for every property in the chain. Not a single online module checked off and forgotten, but a quarterly structured program developed with external equity consultants and tracked at the corporate level, an independent guest advocacy office, staffed separately from property management, empowered to receive and escalate complaints with no intermediate layer of site-level suppression. A new management diversity initiative with specific representation benchmarks and a biennial public report, and a whistleblower protection policy with legal teeth so that the next Odette Carmichael would not spend 2 years filling a notebook in secret because she had no protected channel to speak through. Yolanda Osei paused after that last item. She looked at Odette Carmichael, who was seated in the second row in a pressed blue jacket she had not worn to work before, her hands folded in her lap, her expression holding the particular dignity of a person who has been quietly certain of themselves for a long time and is only now being looked at directly. Yolanda Osei said, "I want to address something separately." She told the room that Odette Carmichael had demonstrated a quality that the Meridian Grand's entire management structure had failed to demonstrate over the same period. She had documented what she saw. She had preserved it carefully. She had waited not with passivity, but with purpose, because she understood that documentation without power was only half of what justice required. She had provided the other half the moment someone with the authority to act walked through the door. The Meridian Grand was offering Odette Carmichael a formal senior hospitality role, overseeing guest experience standards across the property, reporting directly to the incoming general manager, who would be announced within the week. Yolanda Osei made the distinction clearly. This was not a reward. Rewards were for performances. This was a recognition of demonstrated integrity, which was the quality the hotel should have been selecting for all along, and had not. Odette Carmichael pressed her lips together. She nodded. She did not cry, though the woman beside her, one of the other housekeeping staff who had worked alongside her for 6 years, reached over and took her hand briefly. Sunita Rao was named front-of-house manager effective the following Monday. She received the news with the careful composure of someone who had been both hoping for it and afraid to hope, and she thanked Yolanda Osei in a voice that was steadier than she expected it to be. Antoine Lavelle was called into Benedict Hale's workspace separately. He went in expecting the worst and came out with a formal commendation entered into his employment record, acknowledging his cooperation with the investigation and his conduct during a difficult and ambiguous situation. He stood in the corridor afterward for a moment, not quite moving. He had made the right call. The record would say so permanently. The human cost of what had happened did not disappear when the report was filed and the consequences were assigned. That was the part that lingered in the room after the formal announcements were finished and the staff dispersed back to the work of running a hotel that still needed to be run. Colin Mercer had not operated in a vacuum. He had operated inside a system that had tolerated him, not because everyone around him shared his biases, but because the structure had never demanded that anyone confront them. Gerald Foss had not invented the buried complaint procedure. He had simply used a silence that had already been made available to him. The Meridian Grand now had to become something genuinely different, and that work was not ceremonial. It was daily, structural, and accountable in writing. Yolanda Osei understood this better than anyone in the building. She had co-founded the chain. That meant the culture that had allowed this to take root had grown, at least in part, in ground she had helped prepare. That was not self-flagellation, it was precision, and precision was the only starting point for something that was actually going to last. She sat alone in the suite that evening, with the audit report open on the table and the city going dark beyond the skylight above her. She was not finished. She was, for the first time since she had walked through the lobby 5 days ago, in her orange blazer, with her carry-on rolling behind her, exactly where she intended to be, at the beginning of the work that actually mattered. 3 weeks is not a long time. In the architecture of a life, 3 weeks is barely a seam. But Yolanda Osei had learned, across 20 years of building things from the ground up, that transformation does not always announce itself with trumpets. Sometimes it arrives quietly, the way morning light does. Gradually, and then all at once, she pushed through the brass revolving door of the Meridian Grand at 8:47 in the morning. The overhead light inside the lobby hit her the moment she crossed the threshold. That familiar cascade of fluorescent warmth meeting natural skylight through the floor-to-ceiling windows, flooding the marble floor in clean, honest light. She was wearing the orange blazer again, pressed dark trousers, a single carry-on at her side, because she had never needed more than that. She stopped walking for just a moment. She was not dramatic about it. She simply stood and looked. The lobby was busy with the early shuffle of checkout and arrival. But the energy was different. She noticed it the way you notice a room that has been aired out after years of being closed. Not a visible change, but a felt one. Near the front desk, a laminated training guide was mounted in a sleek frame beside the service terminal, its header reading simply, "Every guest, every time." Sunita Rao was at the desk in a crisp white blouse and deep blue blazer, her new front-of-house manager badge catching the light. She was leaning slightly forward as she spoke to an elderly couple, her voice low and warm, both hands resting open on the counter in a posture of complete attention. The couple smiled. Sunita Rao smiled back. It was a small thing. It was not a small thing. Yolanda Osei moved through the lobby without stopping, nodding once at Antoine Lavelle, who stood near the entrance in his security uniform, his posture carrying something it had not carried 3 weeks ago. A kind of settledness. He nodded back with the particular gravity of a man who had made the right choice and knew it. She found Darnell Osei already at a corner table in the hotel restaurant, a window table with morning light pressing in from the east, the sky outside a clean saturated blue. He was in a green sweater and dark jeans, his law textbooks conspicuously absent for once, a coffee already waiting for her at the empty seat. He stood when he saw her, briefly, the way he always did, a habit their mother had installed in both of them so long ago that neither of them remembered learning it. She sat. She wrapped both hands around the coffee. "How does it look?" he asked. "Like a beginning," she said. They did not talk about Colin Mercer. There was nothing left to say about Colin Mercer. His termination was filed, documented, and legally sealed. His regional supervisor had been placed under formal review, the buried complaint from 18 months ago now part of the official record. Both men had been given exactly what the evidence demanded, no more and no less. Yolanda Osei had not celebrated either outcome. She had signed the paperwork and moved on, because the point was never punishment. The point was the architecture that punishment was meant to protect. She told Darnell about the foundation instead. She had been drafting the framework quietly for 2 weeks, working with Benedict Hale's team in the evenings after the audit concluded. It did not have a public name yet. It would provide legal support, emergency funds, and documented advocacy for hospitality workers across the country who faced retaliation for reporting discriminatory management practices. People like Sunita Rao, who had refused to lie when the pressure was direct and immediate. People like Odette Carmichael, who had kept a notebook for 2 years in a locker because she understood that truth without documentation is only memory, and memory can be dismissed. Darnell set down his fork. He looked at his sister for a long moment. "She is going to be part of it?" he asked. "Odette? I already asked her," Yolanda said. "She said she would think about it. Then she called back 40 minutes later and said yes." Darnell laughed quietly and shook his head. Good. They ate. They talked about his upcoming moot court competition, about the conference he had been attending when all of this began, about their mother, who had called Yolanda every day for 2 weeks after the story broke, and who had cried, not with sorrow, but with something fiercer and older than sorrow. After breakfast, Yolanda met with Celeste Fontaine in one of the hotel's smaller meeting rooms, overhead lighting bright and even, a recorder placed openly on the table between them. Celeste was in a rust-colored top and navy trousers, her notepad already dense with questions. Yolanda had read her original piece 3 times. It was precise, it was fair, and it had reached people the way only first-hand witness accounts can reach people. Yolanda had agreed to this interview on one condition, communicated through her assistant in a single sentence. Odette Carmichael's name and role would be part of the story on record, attributed and unburied. Celeste had agreed immediately. The interview lasted an hour. Yolanda spoke carefully and without flourish. She described not the morning of the incident, but the years before it. The quiet complaints she had received, the decision to come herself and see, the exhausting calculus that black women in positions of power perform constantly, the arithmetic of how much dignity to spend and when. She spoke about what the notebook meant. She said, "When someone documents injustice for 2 years in a place where no one is watching, that is not bitterness, that is faith. Faith that the truth will eventually find a witness with the capacity to act on it." When it was over, Celeste closed her notepad and said, quietly and off the record, that she was glad she had been in the lobby that morning. Yolanda said, "So was I." Later, she stood at the front window of the Meridian Grand. The morning had deepened into full daylight. The lobby behind her humming with the ordinary beautiful business of people arriving and departing, bags rolling across marble, keys exchanging hands, a child pointing at the chandelier. She watched the glass door turn and turn again. She did not think about Colin Mercer. She thought about Odette Carmichael's notebook. She thought about 2 years of careful handwriting in a locker no one else had opened. She thought, that is exactly the kind of patience that builds something permanent. Not rage, not revenge, not even the clean satisfaction of a status reversal witnessed by a silent lobby. Permanence came from the painstaking, unglamorous work of documentation, from the refusal to stop believing that accountability was possible, even when all available evidence suggested otherwise. It came from people who kept their notebooks and waited, not passively, but with the specific, disciplined faith of someone who knows that the right person will walk through the door eventually. Yolanda Osei turned from the window and walked back toward her work. You just heard a story that history tried to overlook. If it stayed with you, take a second to stand with it. Subscribe, share, and help us keep telling the stories that deserve light, not silence.